Okay. Can somebody please let me know in the comments that you can see and hear me? Yes, no? Yes, thanks, Pam. Connie's here. Excellent, Kelly. That's fantastic. This is new for me. A new system so that I can so that I can go live in a lot of places at the same time. But I've also got all your comments on the side of my screen, and I can, no matter where you are watching, whether it's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, or whether it is here inside the Facebook group or on the Facebook page, I can actually see everything. So this is great. I'm enjoying this. I've been practicing all week with this software to see whether it's going to work as it should. So we've got Philippa, Joy. Oh, you're up early, Joy, over in Geraldton. Excellent. Okay, so what this is all about is just something that suddenly occurred to me late last week that we're always, and I do exactly the same thing. We get a little bit frustrated and overwhelmed when something goes wrong to our own system, our own setup, and we forget to go through step by step, and often it's our common sense to find out and fix our own issues. Now, instead of going through a lot of the stuff that I'm going to share today is straight from support or from the website, but they're real stories of what's actually happened. So with either myself or with customers, and in the future, I'd love it if some of you would like to jump on here with me and tell us a story on what's happened to you and what's fixed it, what was the cause, and what potentially you did to fix these things. So none of this is heavy. It's lighthearted as well, and just might give you a little bit of peace of mind and insights on how you can fix things yourselves. So first of all, will this work for me? I do have a slide show. Hi, Christine. Prepared. Now this video will stay on the YouTube and also here on Facebook as well. Might get buried a bit in the Facebook group, so YouTube's possibly the easiest place to go back to be able to rewatch or listen to any of these. And I hope they won't take up too much of your time, but let's see how we go and whether you like this type of format. So first of all, for those that don't know me, I'm Tracey Browning, and I have been long arm quilting since 2000. Oh, it's almost scary to say that's 22 years now. And the quilt that's on the screen is recently being published in the Red and White Quilts #2 from Martingale, and it's my sister's design which I've quilted, and she published that as a pattern in that recently released book. And I started out doing lots of machine quilting and on my domestic machine, and I know, yeah, I did, yeah, an awful lot of machine quilting actually on my domestic machine before I just got over it, and I just kept seeing all these long arm machines in magazines and thought, yep, I really want that. So I did lots of research, and I ended up with a secondhand machine with no stitch regulator at the time, and that's how I started. So let's move on. Then very quickly after that, I upgraded to a stitch regulator machine. but I started producing rulers, and let's see if I can maybe turn that off so you don't need to see me all the time. Yeah. There we go. I started producing rulers and started selling all sorts of products for machine quilting only. And I went online, and that Constantine Quilts was born. And the name Constantine came about purely because the farm that I live on is called Constantine Farm, because the original owners 125 years ago came from the town of Constantine in Cornwall in England. So that's a little bit of the history there and why the name came about. So I've been online selling retail for that long. Then I actually went to teach in America with a ruler quilting. Janet Lee invited me over there to MQX, and that was my first trip to America, and had a wonderful time. Met some amazing people. Also fell in love with the A1 quilting machines that weren't in Australia at the time. And about 10 months later, I was finally convinced that, yep, I needed one too. So I received mine, and within a couple of months, some others discovered I had it, and I fell into being the dealer here in Australia for A1 quilting machines. Then the next year, when I went to MQS teaching, I met Zoltan and saw the IntelliQuilter, a demo model, because it wasn't released at that time. But I kept on pushing. I thought, yep, that's the one that I wanted. And I got that late in 2006. The very first IntelliQuilter off the production line was the one that I received. It took me about 3 days to install it on my APQS. It was the first one on an APQS as well. And all the instructions had little gaps in there for me to fill out to complete the instructions from Zoltan. So, and one of the stories that I'm telling today was the reason why it took me 3 days to get it working, for sure. From there, I started the Australian Machine Quilting Festival, and that was created along very similar lines to the machine quilting shows in the US that both my partner at the time, Sharon, and I had both attended and taught at. So we modeled it on the successful shows in America. And Sharon was with me for 3 of those, and the last 2 I did by myself. She retired. And so 5 events over 10 years was that event, until I sold it in 2019. And finally, with all the delays from COVID, that's actually going ahead later this year in Adelaide by the new owners. So I'm thrilled to actually be teaching at this one, as well as exhibiting. Now, from there, of course, I started the IQ Summit. So that was in 2020, when I'd already planned all this and had a lot of stuff prepared before COVID hit. And that was, really, really good to be able to do that. And most of you that are with me now understand what it is. And there are 3 ways, obviously, that the website can help you, because there's lots of individual courses that you could purchase, or there's IQ Summit membership or subscription service, where all of the IntelliQuilter education is on there. You can watch all the past webinars. There's some exclusive things in there as well. Of course, anyone can still come live to a webinar for free and participate that way. But if you want to go back and watch any, then you need to subscribe. Then the Gold membership group, which has a lot more business resources. We have a Q&A every month to chat about anything that you need help with, and there's a lot of very experienced quilters in there as well. So that's it for those that are coming to the first time who have not met me before. So today is all about real stories, and these are some really simple ones. But even me, who has been doing this for a long time, can still do things. You just get a little bit, overwhelmed, and you think, now, what is it? What the heck's gone wrong? And you go, and I think the worst, especially when I'm helping others to fix things, and I immediately go to the worst possible scenario and don't think about the simple basics. So a couple of weeks ago, I was quilting a quilt, and it had quite a bit of line pattern. It was massive quilt. I could barely get my sewing head off the side of the quilt to change bobbins into oil and service. And all of a sudden, I was getting closer to the bottom too. And I was getting obstructions, and really very difficult to unpick stitching on this line pattern. We had a lot of double stitching on it. And it had been quilting absolutely perfectly, no worries. And then all of a sudden it was really going skew if, and it was very annoying. The first thing I went to go and do was I took all the cover off, and I immediately was suspecting that my pulley had unwound and all this sort of stuff, because all I've been doing is helping other people with those issues. But what I should have done is you got to think about, well, why is there an obstruction after it been stitching absolutely fine for a couple of days? So before you touch that restart button, you obviously need to go and look at all your surroundings and make sure there's no true obstruction there. But before you press that restart button, if you try and move your machine, you know it's supposed to be locked in place. So if it's slipping, then you need to, you try and move it side to side, forwards and backwards. And if you can see if anything's slipping, then the motor, you check your motor engagement strength. But even before that, we know what we should do, don't you? We should be cleaning. But these are the instructions that are on the IntelliQuilter website. And personally, I'd rather go through the obstruction checklist that I asked you to download first. But we'll just go through these things first. If you feel that the motor is rolling with relatively low resistance, then you can go and clean. Then it says go to clean rollers, and you can check if that wheel is still turning. But all mine, that was all working. I knew it was working because it went everywhere else. It was just going to be obstructing in that one location for me. Not that I tested it real hard somewhere else. But these are all things that you can check, but be observant when this is happening. If you suddenly see on the screen that your crosshairs aren't moving when you're moving the machine around, then there's something problem. There's a problem. You don't know, the sensor wheels don't know where it is, but mine was still doing that okay. But what I really should have done is go back to that checklist that I said to print out and go through all those basics. I knew I didn't have any true obstructions. And yes, my machine was slipping in that area. So in all honesty, I could skip through most of those things, but that's the problem. When we skip, we sometimes don't see what it could be. I do have lots and lots of bins of threads under my table, and the cords can get hung up on those. But I thought, no, I don't think it's at this time, because it was only moving backwards and forwards. It's a line pattern down the side of the quilt. Some of us have a take-up roller or a leveler bar, and you've got to make sure that if you've advanced the quilt when you're doing this, that you may have to raise that take-up roller so that it's not rubbing on the base of your quilting machine as well. If you use red snappers or the leader grips, and it just so happens that that's on the bottom of that leveler bar, and that could then be rubbing on the base of your machine, that will cause an obstruction. But again, mine wasn't that case. So I suddenly realized that, the next step is to clean. Well, normally that's usually almost the first step after the obvious visual observations. Now, if you're not really sure, what we're cleaning is, you can see where the green arrow is, that's your flat drive wheel. So that one there is a spare one that I happen to, no, it's an old one that doesn't work. And you can see that the wheel's quite shiny, and I reckon that needs a good clean, because it's not gripping, wouldn't grip too well. It's got oil embedded in there. But that's the drive wheel is what moves your machine around, and the sensor wheel, and this is the older version with the O-ring, is the one that knows where your machine is located on the table. So we clean all the rails first, and then you could also clean your drive wheels if that's the case. And on the maintenance and troubleshooting course which is also free on Machine Quilting Academy, all of that is gone. We go through all of that inside that course as well. So after that's done, so we checked all our surroundings and looked for obvious things, threads, cords getting hooked up, then you would test. There's obviously, if they don't work, then we need to save our logs and send it off to support if there's nothing really obvious. You might need to inspect those drive wheels to make sure that they're not cracked or split. And the same with the sensor wheels, and replace those. That's an example of a drive wheel that I've had here, where the rubber separated and actually split right off. There was enough there to keep it going for a while, but I was having all sorts of quality issues with that particular drive wheel. But you know what? The absolute answer for mine was when I really thought about it, after immediately thinking the worst and removing the cover to my X motor. But that's where I took the machine off to the side to change my bobbin. And that's where I oiled my machine. So actually all I had to do was clean the track in that spot and everything worked again. So it was something that simple, but I immediately jumped to the conclusion that mechanically, there's something wrong with my motor, the belts or something else. But really, it truly wasn't. I just went overboard in my brain, and all I had to do was clean. And 9 times out of 10, then cleaning both your tracks and your wheels will solve any obstruction problems. There's certainly other reasons for obstructions, but that is, and you got to sort of think about outside the square. Once I'd suddenly thought about it and realized it was only in that one spot, and that's where I oiled my hook, then it was pretty obvious. So that was my first story for today, and it's a simple one. And I'm sure many, many people have been caught up with that issue and panicked. Over the years, the drive wheels, Connie, have changed. They've been upgraded. There's so many different types now. The most recent, they're calling the rubber-clad wheels, where it's solid on the ends. That was actually a rubber-clad wheel that shredded on there. And honestly, they will last a long time, but they'll last less time if that wheel is, let me go put my camera on, because I just suddenly realized I'm not there, and go to like this. So if the wheel is not perfectly, get my hand parallel to the track, if it's on a bit of an angle, so if it's on an angle, then it's putting more pressure on one part of that rubber wheel than it is on the rest of it. It's not even across the surface of the wheel. And that's when you can actually damage those wheels yourself. And it all comes down to aligning that motor so that it's running both parallel, it's running very close to the track, it's not twisted in any way, and it's not tilted in any way. So there are 3 ways of adjusting those motors using the brackets on our machines. And there is more on that in that maintenance and troubleshooting course as well. So let me go back to being here. What was the next slide? Trying to remember what I did. Okay, if none of that normal 12-point checklist solves the problem, see if you can duplicate the error again with the obstruction. So you start stitching again and duplicate it, then save your logs, because that's the most current information. And these logs, I can't read them. They go to Crystal and Zoltan. Zoltan's the one that reads them. Yep, exactly, Connie. It is very similar to when your car tyres are needing an alignment. They will wear so much more on one side than the other if they're not running straight, if they're not aligned correctly. With the logs, there's pages and pages and pages of gobbledygook. And if you don't save them immediately after the issue has occurred, it makes it really, really hard to trawl through. And it takes a lot of time to trawl through all those pages to work out where the issue is, to be able to see anything in those logs. So just be aware to help both yourself out and support is duplicate it again or save your logs immediately after the error has occurred. That's a bit of a tip to save both your downtime and supports time in having to look at read these logs to try and find a needle in the haystack to work out what it may have been, if it's something inside the software or the hardware. So that is one way. That's a big tip to help out support in finding your issue. So and just remember that support is there, yes, definitely to help us all, and they certainly don't want us to have any more downtime than necessary. But remember, they may have quite a few tickets open each day. So they're working with a lot of people at the same time at times. And the more information you can give them when you submit a support ticket, the less to and froing there will be. And that's especially important for Australian customers because of the time difference as well. Often we're waiting overnight to get an answer. So the more information you can provide, the better. They'll provide you with a checklist, and the way to submit or answer that question is not, yes, I've done all that, because that doesn't help anybody in trying to diagnose. If you actually sit and answer every single question individually, and think a bit outside the square on what you may or may have done prior to having an error, then that can just trigger an idea on what the cause might be. So, yeah, that's a really big thing. When you're putting a support ticket in, did everybody download that IQ data sheet and the obstruction list? I'm hoping everybody did. I'll just quickly, I wonder if I can do that. Share my screen. How do I do that? Here we go. That's it. Does it show up? Here we go. And I'm going to hide that. No, you don't want to see me there. Here we go. The data sheet. I'm getting good at this software. Excellent. This is not compulsory by any means, but if you are busy working on a quilt or something goes wrong with your IntelliQuilter, sometimes it's a lot easier to have this sheet all filled out and just leave it under the plastic on your table, because you don't want to have to back out of what you're doing and to go and find all this information. So put your name on it. Write down what IntelliQuilter version you actually have, because there's so many now, and it really makes it easier for troubleshooting if you can write down the correct version for support to be able to picture that tablet and the different quirks for each one to be able to help you on that one. And what is your tablet model, so you can find that as well. The serial number is on the back of your tablet. Write that one down because that will confirm with support exactly which model or how old it is or anything like that. Now your IQ password. Now you remember how to go find that? You just go into Joy. Where can we find some of these answers? Answers to what's on this sheet. That's what we're going through now. So your IQ password is you go to a system and that will show up there as well. I'll show you in a minute where you can go. Also, which motor version, if you know. Now, if you don't know which motor version you have, take the cover off your motors and take a photo on that one. So the original ones have got the white gears, and then we were up to about version 4 of the super motors. That gets a bit harder to determine which one it is. But if you know what year you received them, then maybe write that down. Also, very important to write down your longarm brand and what model and year of manufacture. So what year you got that, if you got it new. And it's also important to write down what type of stitch regulator, whether you've got hydraulics on the legs of your table, what type of wheels or track system, because so many of the brand machines now have upgraded the stitch regulators, or they have different track systems, and we don't know whether you have upgraded your track system or wheels or anything else on your machine. So whether you've got edge riders or M&M wheels for APQS, or you've got the Bliss system or the Breeze system for Gamels, etc. So write all this down, and any other notes to remember, anything else that you've done with the machine or modifications that may give support a bit of a clue on what they've been doing there. So that makes it really handy. Now I'm just going to share my screen again and go and find the IntelliQuilter tab. So to find, now where is it? Show in screen. There we go. On your IntelliQuilter, that's your main menu. To find your password, go to System, and here it is, System Password. So that's my system password on my stick, and that's it. That's how easy it is to go find it. So go back to the main menu, System, and System Password. Under the same system utilities is where you copy your logs to the USB as well. So, and that's how simple that one is. After you have reproduced that error. Okay, so let me get back to here and also here. Okay, done. Now, what was my next slide? Next story. This is a funny one. Okay, I had someone who we replaced their docking station, and now her IntelliQuilter wouldn't talk to her machine. And again, this is long distance, and it was actually my sister who had done this, and she doesn't use her machine very often. She only would use it at the very most once a week when she works in the shop on a Saturday. So every Saturday when I get a phone call from my sister, and I know it's because she's attempting to put a quilt on and she's forgotten what she did last time on how to use her long arm machine and the IntelliQuilter. She's not a quilter, a long arm quilter at all. She's a designer. She's done lots of won awards for her domestic machine quilting, but she did pick up a second-hand system thinking that, yep, this would be really great for her shop. And we've trained a couple of staff members, but it's never ever lasted. So she's had to force herself to learn to do some, just to get some shop samples quilted. But we always have an issue every time. And it was a very old long arm machine that she got, and it had its own issues as well. So what we should have done was, before removing or replacing anything, take a photo. Now, I would recommend this for absolutely anybody. I do it myself. If I'm working on someone's machine and it's not hugely familiar with me, I'll always take a photo of how it was when everything's working. And that's one thing that Helen didn't do. And it was also a number of weeks in between her removing this docking station and before she finally got around to replacing it. So, but what we did do is that we tugged on each individual wire on these. Here's your 6-pin connector, and that's what it looks like on your backer machine. On the right, on the pictures there. So you've got a 6-pin green connector and a 2-pin. That 6-pin green connector is part of your, what we call the switch cable. And that's what talks to your long arm machine. It piggybacks on the single stitch and the start switch of your machine. The little 2-pin connector is the communication to your X and Y motor. So we tugged on all of these wires gently to see if they were still firmly seated in that plug. We checked the other end of the switch cable where it was attached to her quilter machine, because of course she had to take all these out to swap the docking station over. We also checked those orange blocks behind the back cover to push them onto the pins to make sure they were still firmly pushed in. So we'd done all that. We still weren't getting anything. We started chatting about other stuff, as we do, and we're trying to work out what on earth she would have done between taking off the docking station, and because the previous docking station was working, but it just wasn't powering up her tablet. So there's a problem with powering her tablet or charging the battery in the tablet, but the rest of it was working fine. So this shouldn't have happened just by swapping it over. So we did think it could have been the front run switch on her long arm machine, because it was a bit dodgy. It always was. And so we got an electrician in, and we actually got that rewired, and that was all fixed. But we thought that could have been the issue. We tested the switches on the rear and the front handles, and only the front wouldn't work when the IQ was all plugged in. So I'm thinking, it really did come back to this connection on how the machine is connected to the computer system. Communication tests are all okay, but no single stitch or start stitch. And then I finally asked her for a photo. I kept talking about these plugs and we're testing them and everything, but I didn't think to ask her for a photo first, because guess what? She had them plugged in wrong. And that's all it was. But that plug has got 3 lots of holes, on the top, on the end, and on the bottom of the plug. And of course, I know what the top and the bottom and the end means, but she didn't, because she's not familiar with it. So I think she totally, from memory, and I just went and plugged these in and showed you. You can plug them in 3 different ways, but only one way is going to work. So I reckon she might have flipped hers so it was upside down, but of course you can still plug it in. So that was all what the problem was. And if she'd taken a photo first, we wouldn't have had this issue. Now, this was over 2 or 3 weeks that we're trying to troubleshoot, because she's only in on a Saturday, and it's when she's not busy. So that's the correct way to plug those green plugs in. And remember at the beginning I said about it took me 3 days when I installed my very first IntelliQuilter on my APQS machine. And wouldn't matter which machine you were installing it on, if those green plugs, the problem was why I couldn't get the IntelliQuilter to talk to my machine was because I had plugged them in on the wrong orientation. And until Zoltan, I was going back and forth with Zoltan, I couldn't get it to work. And finally, same thing. He asked me for a photo. I said no, because I wasn't provided with a photo in the instructions. It was just, plug them in. And it's obvious which pins they have to go on, but it's not obvious which orientation they go on those pins in. So that was another story. And it's not Helen's done it. I've done it. I've had another dealer that I was supporting remotely who was setting up a new IQ in the middle of Australia, and she's ringing me panicking with exactly the same thing. But at that point, I could pick it up with the steps that she'd taken to install this system, and I thankfully thought of this immediately. And once we had those plugs plugged in correctly, everything would work again. Okay, so the next one story, and I'm only doing 3 today. I had another customer who was having intermittent stitching errors. There was long stitches in the stitch out, and she was positive it was her IntelliQuilter with related communication errors, but she couldn't actually tell me what those communication errors were. She also didn't tell me that it sounded a little bit different when stitching, just intermittently. So there was some listening that needed to be done. And I'll say that this lady, she's a beautiful lady, lovely customer, but she truly only uses her IntelliQuilter with a machine. She never uses her machine on its own or freehand. So she does find it difficult to understand that it's 2 separate systems, and usually blames the computer for everything rather than the machine. So what we should have done first, and I should have known better with this customer, is we really need to perform a visual inspection of all the wiring. Just like when we have an obstruction, so hers wasn't an obstruction, so we didn't go through that checklist with anything catching or anything like that. But just do a visual inspection of the whole area. Don't narrow it down to just the stitch in front of you on the quilt top. Think about something else. It could have been encoders, except she doesn't use the stitch regulator, only uses manual mode. It could have been something to do with IQ skidding or something. We didn't know, but she wanted to blame the IQ and didn't give me the full picture at the time. But that's what should have happened, is do a visual inspection of your whole setup first. What did we go through? We started with this because she was positive it was her IntelliQuilter. We checked all the communication tests. We checked that the top of the tablet was tilted to the rear, because I was assuming it was intermittent communication errors where the tablet may be disconnecting from the docking station, which then gave mixed signals to the motors to move or not. Remember, she hadn't told me that there was a different sound to her motor when this was happening at this point. So we went through all of these checks, checked the speed settings to ensure that there wasn't too much vibration, made sure the difference between the speed and the detail on the IQ was less than 5, and her long arm machine was in manual mode at the correct speed. And then I started thinking outside the square, and I asked her to turn off her IntelliQuilter and only use her long arm machine. And of course, she never does this. So it was not obvious to her, and that's understandable. That was luckily I know this customer. I've been to her home a number of times on the other side of the country. And so I had to use that knowledge. But if it was through support, it would have been a much harder situation. Now, I wanted to make sure that a long arm machine would work as it should. And it worked fine whilst it wasn't moving around the table. But once she was moving it around the table, I could occasionally hear a difference in the motor. And this is what I could hear. But I don't know whether she couldn't hear it or she just wasn't registering that was happening. But I wanted to do it in manual mode and ignore the stitch regulator, because that's what it should be if the IntelliQuilter was moving it. So we checked a power supply because she uses a step-down transformer to convert from 240 volt to 110 for her machine. And then we checked the power cord was firmly plugged in to the power point and into the machine. Did all these checks, all the basic checks to try and work it out. Now, normally I would have thought when we got to this point that it's a long stitch, not a skip stitch, by the way. where the needle did not enter the quilt. So we had to determine that as well. But I asked lots and lots of extra questions, and what I discovered, but she enjoyed having her puppies in her sewing room all the time with her, their company. And she admitted they tended to chew things when she wasn't supervising. So she didn't notice, but eventually when I made her focus on all these things, we found bite marks on some of the wiring, and that was the clue. There wasn't actually bite marks on this cable, but we had to get in some help. We got an electrician in to test everything. And it was, in the end, it was her power cord on the long arm machine had been compromised. There was no bite marks that had gone through the plastic or anything like that. In fact, it looked all right. There was bite marks on some other extension cord she had under the table, and again, that was a bit of a clue. But there must have been a wire that had broken inside the plastic covering of her long arm power cord. So we had to go get a new one of those, and everything was fixed. And it is difficult sometimes if you haven't had a long arm machine, if you get both systems together, to understand that it is two different systems. And we do need to determine when we're troubleshooting, even if it's when we're using the IntelliQuilter that these symptoms happen, we've got to work out whether it's the computer system or whether it's the long arm machine. And in this case, it was the power cable to her long arm machine. So being really honest and observant took a long time, until letting me know that the puppies were in there. And whilst they maybe not, who knows, they may not have caused that issue on this cable, but just the fact that we saw bite marks on some things just clued me in. Let's check the integrity of all the cables. And that's how we managed to narrow that one down. But always observe that any messages on your IntelliQuilter screen, or whether there is or there isn't, and write them down when they appear, and also what you were doing when they appeared. That also helps us to try and recreate it and go through the steps to see if we can narrow down where a problem may be. So that was that one. And let me see, what did I do on the next slide? Here we go. She still does have her puppies in her sewing room, but they're a little bit older now, and she does supervise them, I think, a lot closer, because they are the cutest little dogs. And this lady is the most lovely person. She quilts hundreds of charity quilts every single year, and we sure need more people like her in the world. So that's what I did for there. I think that was my last slide for today. So they're the stories as such that I had prepared for today. I do have some others that are probably a little bit more involved. But I guess what my point is with a lot of our stories, and when we do need to go to, let me go to put that off. Here we go. When we do need to do a support ticket and send it to support for some extra assistance, is that if they provide you with a checklist to do each step one by one, but answer each step, take photos, take a video, give broader information. Don't just say, yep, I've done all that, because an awful lot of times we discover if you've done every single step in that checklist, then you should have found the solution earlier on. We've had cases recently where it's taken 3 weeks and a lot of man hours on both parties to solve the problem. And the problem would have been solved if one of the earlier steps had actually been done when we asked them to be done, and reported back exactly what they found. So there is a reason. So it might sound repetitive, but we can't see your machine when you're upset that it's not working, and we don't have eyes on your machine unless you give us that information. And it doesn't matter how silly or how embarrassed you might be, the more information that you can provide, the easier it is to troubleshoot. But yeah, don't panic. Anything can be fixed. Anything can be sorted out. Most of the time, we've just got to work through the steps so that we can help each other to actually do these. Now, one last thing, and this is also in that maintenance course, but I'm going to share my screen again. If I can get it up. There it is, that one there. And show, here we go. This document is also in the maintenance course. I go through, there's a video on there with all the routine maintenance, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to reformat this so that, I'll just turn my video off so I'm not cutting off. Here we go, not cutting off any of the writing. Here you go. And just as a quick reminder for routine maintenance is to each day you can wipe down all your surfaces where the drive motors run. You know, that fat little drive wheel, the rubber drive wheel. So where they run, always wipe down those surfaces. And some say do it with Windex, sprayed on a paper towel, let it air dry. Some use rubbing alcohol. Either is fine to let that dry. Personally, with me, most of the time on my old machine with rails that would oxidize, I used a bit of batting and I just rub it until no black came off to make it really clean. But I would use the rubbing alcohol on the front rail where I have potentially oiled my hook area and oil can splash over onto the rail. I always use rubbing alcohol for that. Clean off your sensor wheels with a bit of dry batting. Depending on whether you've got the latest hard plastic ones, you just got to keep that clean. The dry batting will do the job. Keep any lint off it and threads. The rubber O-rings also can be cleaned. Oil can get into those. So the latest ones don't gather nearly as easy. Make sure that there's no cracks. Little hairline cracks are okay, but if it's big enough for your fingernail to get into, that'll affect the IQ's performance and should be replaced. Before turning on your IQ, move your machine and watch the sensor wheels to make sure they are turning and that they're running in the correct position with no wobbling. If those sensor wheels start wobbling, often that's simply the set screw has gotten a little bit loose and it's loose on the shaft. So just make sure that they are turning and there's no wobbles. And this is all just a very quick visual check. It really doesn't take long. Check your machine's wheels and clean them if necessary. If you've got the edge riders, then clean any of the black oxidization off of them. They're easy to see. But now it says try using a light mixture of soap and water for the sensor wheels first. No, I'm reading the wrong ones. No, that's right. Don't use anything wet or spray anything on. Now, let me see. The original APQS cardboard wheels, so there was brown ones and then they moved to black ones. Never ever spray those with any sort of moisture because they will collapse on you. You can use rubbing alcohol or something on a Q-tip to wipe it out, but don't soak them with anything because that does not end well for those ones. Okay, make sure your tablet's AC adapter jack at the back of the machine is fully plugged in. And also check the connection into the transformer as well. And clean your screen. Oh, I'm guilty of that one. I rarely clean my tablet screen. When the sun hits it the wrong way, I get really embarrassed and think I really should be cleaning that. But if you put it into your regular maintenance, then that will certainly help your tablet screen. And don't forget that touch screen, we rely on that for the accuracy and to respond. So if it gets really, really grubby, it's not going to respond as well. So it's probably not a bad idea, and maybe I should take my own advice for that one. Okay. Now the last one is once a month check all connections on the interface board. We've been through that today. And also drain and recharge your tablet's battery about once every couple of months. So I'm not sure. Do you do the battery maintenance? It certainly keeps your battery a lot healthier these days. This is what they recommend on most of the computer manuals. Is so all you got to do is turn your tablet on when it's off the machine and let it run down flat, and then attach your a charger and let it fully charge without turning your tablet on. Okay. That's when the orange light turns green when it's fully charged. Shouldn't take too long. And repeat it one more time. So if you do that every couple of months, you will actually allow your large lithium battery to fully discharge and then recharge, and it will work for longer and last a lot longer. So there we go. I think that is, now let me go back to here, it for today. There you go. You got me again. Again, this is just stories. I might put something out in another newsletter. And if anyone wants to share their story and come on the screen with me, then I'd love for that to happen. Put in the comments on either platform that you happen to be on, whether this is something you want to see more of or again. It was just an idea that we could come up with some stories, and I'd love to have other people's stories as well. And we all can learn from each other on how we have fixed or prevented or gotten past any little glitches that may or may not have been self-inflicted. There are plenty of times when it's not self-inflicted. There is an issue, and that's the beauty of CASA Engineering or IntelliQuilter, that they really do back us up, and they will supply parts to fix anything that they know has failed, except for when we need to take responsibility ourselves in the maintenance and the alignment of our motors to not do any damage ourselves. Drive wheels and belts, etc., are usable items that we're responsible for, but we can do things to maintain the longevity of those items as well. So hopefully that was a bit of fun, something different from me, and this will stay on the YouTube channel and in the Facebook group, so anybody can come back and watch at any time. But I'd love to have some other people on with me, and we can share our experiences and hopefully help somebody else and not panic when something happens. Remember that just like me, I still do it. I should have just cleaned my tracks the other week, and I wouldn't have had the issues and the unpicking that I had to do. Sometimes basic is all that is needed. So don't freak out. Everyone's here to help. All righty. I think that's it from me. And I'm thinking that this software worked, which is really, really great. Don't forget that I'll just put this one up. If you want to learn more, and there's a lot of free information as well, head over to Machine Quilting Academy and definitely sign up for the IQ maintenance and troubleshooting. There's a lot more videos and information in that as well. So it's a lot easier to see things, see how to clean, see how to align, see how to perform some of these things all by yourself, which is what we have to do when we purchase these systems. We don't have a service person in every single town, and it's our responsibility to learn how to maintain and service and keep our machines running well. So this has been great. I've actually enjoyed using this software, and it's all worked as it should as well. Great, Sheila. I'll talk to you a little bit later, and we'll keep working on your issue. Okie doke. Bye for now.